Putin is at an impasse. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, the Russian dictator has spoken about direct negotiations with Ukraine. What is behind this desperate move? Meanwhile, Trump is fueling intrigue. In just 3 days, he promises to unveil a scandalous peace plan. Everyone is holding their breath. Fateful negotiations have begun in London. What will all this lead to? All the details in the report.
The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, for the first time since the full-scale invasion, has proposed holding bilateral negotiations with Ukraine.
Ukraine, as it were, has also not expressed a desire to conduct direct negotiations with the Russian Federation. Moreover, we have a corresponding document which states that we will not, let's say, negotiate with Putin. That is, it's more of an attempt to just delay, to probably shift the responsibility more onto the USA. We're not involved here anymore. We're with Ukraine, but then Ukraine didn't want to, or something else.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, emphasized that Ukraine is ready for any discussion about a ceasefire, or at least reducing the shelling of civilian infrastructure. According to statements from the Russian side, Russia has no specific plans for a moratorium on strikes against civilian infrastructure. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief acknowledged that there were no possible alerts on Easter, and there was a lull in some sections of the front. And this means that Russia is indeed moving towards reducing killings. But unfortunately, it was short-lived. And despite the proposal to continue the truce, Russia resumed shelling Ukraine, with even greater intensity along the entire front line.
Once again, Trump proposed a truce. Ukraine agreed. The Russian Federation began to put forward additional demands. And of course, Trump needs to act somehow.
The Institute for the Study of War is convinced that Putin does not want to cease hostilities. Meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that representatives from Ukraine, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States will meet to discuss a peaceful resolution to the Russian-Ukrainian war in London on April 23rd.
If we talk about the London meeting, yes, it could be an important event that might formalize certain outlines of the negotiation process, but it certainly won't drastically change the course of the war. That is, it's more of an attempt to align the positions of Washington, European capitals, and Kyiv before proposals can be directly sent to Moscow, to the Kremlin, to Putin, and so on.
The London meeting will be the second after Paris, where the US, Ukraine, and its European allies will discuss the American plan for a ceasefire in the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is reported that at the meeting, the US may propose to ease sanctions against Moscow and recognize Russia's control over the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea.
The Europeans are definitely not interested in having a border with the Russian Federation. In this case, they understand precisely the image of this, which they eat with the Russian Federation and the necessity of strengthening Ukraine as a frontier that restrains, let's say, the aggression of the Russian Federation, giving the European Union time to better prepare for a potential friendly confrontation.
Meanwhile, as politicians consult, American President Donald Trump, who threatens to withdraw from the negotiation process, promises to reveal the details of a peace plan to end the war. This is reported by the New York Post.
Can the US withdraw, right? Well, on one hand, they could say, make everyone guilty. Ukraine, Russia, Europeans, they are not ready, they don't want to, and so on. And say that we have other tasks and we will focus on them. But here it's important to understand that a holy place is never empty. And whoever wants to take the place of the United States as a mediator or try their hand, like China, in the situation of strategic rivalry that exists between China and the USA, they probably wouldn't want that, right? That is China has its own, let's say, achievements in the field of diplomacy in resolving various conflict situations. Therefore, this might be, like playing along with this story, so to speak.
By the way, despite the trade war that exists between the States and China, American media, citing their sources, claim that Trump insists on a face-to-face meeting with China's leader Xi Jinping. What exactly Trump wants to discuss with Xi is not known for sure.
The Kremlin is...
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Is already preparing for the victory frenzy scheduled for May 9th. For the 80th anniversary of the end of that war, Putin will try to sell Russians his pseudo-great victories in the war against Ukraine. And likely the main bet of the rebels was placed on the capture of Pokrovsk. On which other fronts is a surge in Russian offensives possible in the coming days? Watch in the report.
Bloody gifts for Putin. By May 9th, Russia might attempt to capture a few more kilometers of Ukrainian land. And here, it's not about tactics, but symbolism. The Kremlin needs visuals and catchy headlines. And it doesn't matter if hundreds or even thousands of Russian soldiers fall.
After all, we're all mortal, right?
A theatrical offensive might begin southwest of Pokrovsk towards the Dnipropetrovsk region. There, only about 4 kilometers remain from the Russian positions to the border. According to Austrian Colonel Markus Reisner, this direction could become a point of pressure in the coming days.
For the average citizen, including Russians, the real picture of the front is unclear. But if they read in the newspaper that Russian troops are already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, it will have an informational impact.
Against the backdrop of this information war, Russia creates the illusion of pressure along the entire front line while maintaining strategic initiative. The Ukrainian armed forces are forced to respond to enemy attacks. This, says Reisner, is a strategic trap that works. The occupiers rely on numbers, and they are certainly not fighting alone. Artillery shells from North Korea, drones and technology from Iran, resources from China and Beta, India.
North Korea, a country we consider to be ruled by a madman, has already supplied 3 million artillery shells twice in a row, last year and the year before. The Russians produced between 2.5 to 3 million artillery shells during the same period, totaling 12 million artillery shells. What have we done during this time? We supplied the Ukrainians with 1.6 million last year and 1.3 million the year before.
I wouldn't tie it to dates that are sacred even for the Russians. This is a mistaken opinion. The fact is the Russian offensive has not stopped. Therefore, when statements are made about a possible Russian offensive on certain sections of the front, this information does not correspond to reality. The statements of the Austrian colonel are controversial, and I'll explain why. The strategic task of the Russian troops is to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk region. That is, the Dnipropetrovsk direction is not a priority.
Putin continues to fantasize. Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions are still within the imaginary borders of Russia for him. He included them in the Russian Federation back in 2022. And it seems that the Russian dictator does not want to deviate from this plan. This is also confirmed by the latest statement from Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, that a ceasefire is impossible at this stage. Currently, Russia is amassing its troops at the border with Ukraine, most actively in the Donetsk direction.
At the moment, operational reserves are being transferred to the Donetsk direction from the Kursk direction. And I do not rule out the possibility of replenishing the personnel with conscripts. Let me remind you, the Russian Federation is currently undergoing the so-called spring draft, which aims to replenish the personnel of the occupying country's armed forces. Well, approximately 160,000 personnel.
Apparently, the intensification of hostilities is related to the fact that Russia is once again recruiting a fresh batch of cannon fodder, young guys who will be sent to die for the Tsar's ambitions. But this scenario has long been calculated by the Ukrainian command. The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing for every move of the enemy. Neither false targets nor diversionary maneuvers will confuse them. The defenders of Ukraine stand firm so that not a single centimeter of our land becomes a gift to the Kremlin's victory frenzy. Neither on May 9th nor on any other day.
Intense explosions in Russia, and this is just the beginning. Russia is in the crosshairs from space. Japan shocks the Kremlin by providing Ukraine with top-secret satellite images that can see even through walls and fog. It's about a technology that cannot be deceived. Hell on the front line for the occupiers is just beginning. Why a country that has always stayed on the sidelines is now helping Ukraine, and what this means for Russia, we will tell you right now.
Numerous successful strikes on refineries.
Air! Air! Come here behind the concrete wall. Who? It's okay, the shrapnel won't get through.
To military depots, bases and Russian military-industrial complex facilities.
It's fine! It's fine!
All of this would have been impossible without one important detail: satellite reconnaissance. The Land of the Rising Sun has agreed for the first time in history to provide data from Japanese satellites to Ukrainian intelligence.
Japan has agreed to provide geospatial data to the Ukrainian intelligence community. This is new territory for Japan and it carries its own set of risks.
The Ukrainian GUR has signed a cooperation agreement with the Japanese IQPS Institute, which owns 5 satellites in orbit. Now, radar images taken using SAR satellites will be utilized by Ukrainian intelligence. Japan has become the 4th country to provide Ukraine with such SAR images.
Ukraine already has access to SAR systems from Finland's ICE, Germany's SR-Lib SARA, Italy's Cosmos SkyMed 1 and 2, and now Japan's IQPS.
The agreement provides for the integration of systems owned by the Japanese IQPS Institute into the platforms used by the Ukrainian Main Intelligence Directorate. Experts and analysts separately note the supply of SR data from Japan, which is generated using synthetic aperture radar technology and significantly aids Ukrainian intelligence.
The Main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense uses satellite imagery data to determine the locations, permanent or temporary deployment of personnel, the movement of Russian occupation forces units, and the permanent locations of air defense, missile defense systems, and electronic warfare systems, i.e. legitimate military targets both in the temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine and accordingly on the territory of the Russian Federation.
SAR satellites can create high-resolution images regardless of weather conditions or time of day. In addition, they allow for the identification of even the smallest objects on the Earth's surface. Thanks to this, the armed forces of Ukraine will have an advantage in observation, target acquisition, reconnaissance, or their own positioning on the battlefield.
Thanks to the availability of satellite images, strikes were carried out on airfields, that's 370, more than 200 on positions of air and missile defense systems, and 153 strikes on oil refineries and oil depots. In addition, about 20 strikes on naval bases.
In light of Washington's provocative statements and decisions regarding the suspension of military aid and, most importantly, the exchange of intelligence information, the search for alternative sources of high-tech satellite data is a matter of Ukraine's ability to detect and strike the enemy, both directly on the front and deep in the rear.
Well, indeed, as you can see, that is all there is for now. For more fiery news from the front, tune into the next episode.